What is going on, everybody? Nick here, and in this video I'm going to talk a little bit about my preferred way to build scenarios in Make.com. It's called iterative testing, and it's something that in my many years of experience on this platform I rarely see anybody do. So I'm going to teach you how to do it. I'm going to teach you how to save a ton of time, and I'm also going to teach you how to essentially, this is a system you can use to train any junior engineers that you want in your team to be able to not only get up and running quicker, but for their flows and systems to be a lot more maintainable as well. So if you guys are wondering why I look kind of like a K-pop star right now, it's just because I don't have my mic stand. So I'm just going to be holding this one with one hand, and we're going to be doing some work with my other. As always, this is my process. It's not the only way that you can do this. It's just what I prefer. And in the case of iterative testing specifically, it is easily the most powerful building method that I have found for Make.com. And I think when a lot of you guys see it, it's just going to click. That said, I'm sure there are other ways that you can technically build scenarios. So take whatever makes sense to you out of this video and then just discard whatever isn't relevant. And last but not least, no gatekeeping. I'm just going to show you everything and then even give you guys whole systems that you guys can sell. All right, so when most people think of the word test, I find personally they have a very specific definition, especially in Make.com. When people think test, they usually think it's a large integrative end-to-end test that runs every single module and every single scenario in your flow. Essentially, if this is our scenario over here, and this is just an example that I whipped up for my community where I show people how to build not only scenarios, but actually like full automation businesses from start to finish. This is just something I was doing for a CRM test in ClickUp. But if you're thinking about an end-to-end test the scenario, this essentially involves starting at the very beginning, all the way on the left-hand side here with this watch responses module, and then proceeding sort of logically from left to right, ending with this ClickUp module. And end-to-end testing is important, and you should most definitely do it before you consider an automation done. You can save yourself a ton of development time if you use my iterative testing method instead. Not only does iterative testing save you tons of time and money by confirming that your expectations match what's really going on, and I'm going to get into that in a second, but you'll probably save several hours every project by doing this, not to mention a ton of gray hairs, because my biggest issue when I first started out in Make.com, and just automations more general, and hell, even like software development, was I wouldn't understand where my bugs were taking place, and then I wouldn't understand why my bugs were taking place. And iterative testing solves both of these problems. This is going to be a quick and easy video. We're not going to spend too much time on this. I find that the benefits of iterative testing become immediately clear. But essentially, if you iteratively test as you build, you're never going to be spending hours working on silly little bugs. You're never really going to have to worry about tiny things like you guys missing a curly brace, or you guys not including, the right kind of quote or dash. You're never really going to have a what the hell is going on and why isn't this working moment. Because if something doesn't work, you'll know exactly where in your scenario from start to finish the logic is failing or things are breaking. Ultimately, your flows will break a lot less often, meaning when they do, you'll be able to fix them faster. And all of this is going to collaborate and essentially help you build much better scenarios in a much shorter amount of time. So one of the reasons why I think people like watching me build these Make.com flows so much is just because I'll jump around pretty fast and I'll do just a bunch of really quick little hacks here or there. And I'm going to be developing a much longer video on this in the future. But for the purposes of iterative testing, if you really want to be able to do this quickly, you're going to need to understand a few of these. And so what I have here I have 4 quick little workflow building hacks that I'm going to go through, and I'll essentially just show you how you can use these to iteratively test. And then afterwards, we're actually going to go through and then iteratively test and build that same scenario that we saw right over here, including like on a module by module basis. And then we're actually going to just end-to-end test the whole thing as well. So I'm just going to show you exactly what my actual testing process looks like in Make.com. And I think it's going to help a lot of you guys not only build faster, but just build more maintainable flows that last. Okay, so the very first hack here is to separate the trigger module from the list module. Now, if you guys have seen my previous videos, you'll know that I do this sort of thing quite a bit. But what does this really mean? Well, essentially, in Make.com, you typically have triggers and actions, right? The trigger is, a lot of the time, it's like a webhook or something. If I right-click this Typeform Watch Responses module, let me just get it a full screen so we can actually see what's going on. If I right-click this Typeform Watch Responses module, essentially what it's doing is it's waiting for me to fill out a form or somebody else to fill out a typeform. And the typeform in question is this one right here. This is just a quick little proposal generator form that I put together for day 8 of my 14-day agency course. And in this, I'll go through and I'll ask a bunch of questions like, hey, who's the prospect? Give me a one-line summary of their business. What's the problem they're suffering from? What's the solution you pitch? What are the deliverables? How long will this take to deliver? And how much will you price? And essentially, we fill out this form, which I'm going to fill out right now just sort of as a test. I'm going to do this with one hand because the other hand is going to hold my mic like a K-pop star. We're just going to go ASDF. Unfortunately, I cannot fill this out without typing in an email address. Kind of feel like I'm texting right now. We're going to type that in. I'm going to do a couple of brief little summary pieces here. Okay, so say that I'm filling this out now, and I have my module here, which is watching my responses. If I click the submit button, this has now been caught, right? The issue with this, though, is obviously I just filled in a bunch of bullshit. But the issue with this is, let's say I wanted to test the scenario again. I would have to go back to my form, and every time that I wanted to test that scenario, I would have to do that process, which if you had a watch and timed it, would probably be at least 15 or 20 seconds. Now, what this design pattern here, what this quick hack allows you to do, is it allows you to store that response and then just pull from that response, the one that I just filled in once, every single time you test your scenario from here on out. So instead of spending 15 seconds, now all I'm really doing, if you think about it, so I'm just right-clicking this, pressing Run Module once, and then voila, I have basically the same data right over here. As completely useless as it is. And so in practice, in order to do this, what you really need to do is you need to have a watch module. And I'm using a Typeform here as an example, but realistically, you could use any sort of flow, any sort of form software that you could possibly want. You can't necessarily do this with Google Forms. You can do this with JotForm. You can do this with, I think you can do this with Paper Forms. And you can do this with a variety of like CRM form-based solutions, right? Like ClickUp as a form solution embedded within it. Monday as a form solution embedded within that sort of thing. But essentially what you do is you will go to your desired form platform of choice, and then you will connect a watch module or a trigger module. And then you will add a sleep module between the trigger. And I usually use 3 seconds or so. And then immediately afterwards, you will add a list. Like so. And the value of doing it this way is, well, now when you catch the scenario, when you catch the webhook response come in, because really that's what this specific module is doing in the background, you're then sleeping for a couple of seconds just to make sure the database is okay. I find just in practice, if you don't do this, there's like a 20% chance that it runs so quickly, it doesn't even have the time to add it to the database. But anyway, you'll wait a few seconds, and then you'll just grab the very first record immediately afterward, which just ends up being the first record, aka the record that was just submitted. And then if you want to test this in the future, then all you have to do is sort of unlink this, then drag the trigger to the beginning of the flow, starting at your list responses module, or basically starting at whatever module just grabs from your database or your data source. And so this specific flow, should be pretty self-explanatory, but basically what we're doing is we're creating a proposal, and then we're embedding it inside of ClickUp, which is our customer relationship management platform. And in order to test this, we no longer have to go through all of the rigmarole, all the BS, basically, of filling out the form. I mean, I just put in a bunch of fake data here because, I only had one hand, but now we just click run once, and then it goes through the rest of our scenario for us, which is quite nice. Now, I did just put a bunch of L's and J's in here, so I doubt that it's going to proceed as I imagine that it would if you filled it out with actual information, but I think you guys get my point. The second quick hack I actually showed in the previous quick hack, which is that you can just right-click any module and then press run this module only. Surprising, but a lot of people don't know this, and this is easily one of the biggest time savers that you could use, because instead of now testing the entire flow and waiting for your whole make.com scenario from start to finish to complete, you can just right click and then you can just run the specific module that you want. And then you can look at the input modules and then the outputs, right? And then you can compare those inputs and outputs. And you can just determine whether or not what you are doing is like the desired behavior, whether you're feeding that module in the desired input. Now, this is the first time you're doing this. What you'll notice is modules that have a bunch of data in it, or modules that have a bunch of variables in it. When you right click and try to run it only, it'll actually pull out a module or a modal like this. And it'll say, what's the problem they're suffering from? What are the deliverables? How long will this take to deliver? Give me a one-line summary of their business. These are all variables, essentially, that I was pulling from the type form. Well, because I'm now right-clicking and running this module only, I need to fill this in somehow. So if you are running one of these modules, you are going to have to fill it in with some test data. But if you think about it, that's kind of the whole point, because you can simply enter that test data in every single time you run that specific module, just to determine whether that test data works for that module input or output. And in practice, I find this is particularly relevant with AI modules, large language model modules, stuff like Anthropic Cloud, stuff like GPT-4, that sort of deal. I mean, it looks like it actually went with my LKJLK. And in this case, it, basically hallucinated a bunch of bullshit. But maybe, that's our desired behavior. Maybe that's something we're looking for. Maybe we're trying to test how it works on LJKLJ nonsense inputs, right? Well, now we can do that without also like wasting 5 operations for the entire scenario run. And, we can do it in a fraction of the time. So collectively, if you think about it, I mean, these 2 hacks alone just saved us, 30 seconds every time we try to test a scenario. And what I find in practice is that we usually test scenarios like 30 times at least before we deliver the project, before we consider it done. So 30 times 30 seconds, right? You're saving yourself at least 15 minutes just combining these 2 things. If you're doing a templated sort of thing that normally would take you an hour, well, congrats, you just got 25% more efficient. So these are pretty entry-level hacks, and most people that have watched my videos up until now will probably already instinctively understand them just because you've seen me do them a bunch. But one thing that most people haven't seen is this download input or output JSON hack. And this one's really cool. Basically, you see this module here that we just completed for Anthropic Claude. Well, if you click on this little bubble, obviously, you get the input and then you get the output. But if you go up here to this little download icon, you can actually download the output bundles. And if you click on this, you'll see that no longer is this in make.com variable format. Now this is all just in JSON. And you'll see that there are a couple differences here from what we saw in the variable field for make.com and then what we're seeing in the JSON. Namely, every time that there's a new line, we now have a \n. And then before every quote, we now have this sort of like slash. It's sort of annoying. But this is a very quick and easy way to basically get data in and then use it to do something, which I'll show you in a sec. Basically fill in the next variable for you so you don't have to run data-heavy modules anymore. What I mean by this is all just JSON, right? So if you take out all of the \n's, all of these extra new lines, then if you remove all of these backslashes that are before every quote, well, now you have functional JSON. Essentially, this is now JSON that works. And so you could just pop this into a parse JSON module, and then voila, you now have basically all the same data. It's just now you have the same data without having to run the module, if that makes sense. The value here is that, well, sometimes every module that you run, like this Anthropic Claude module, does cost you a little bit of money. It also takes a fair amount of time. And most importantly, sometimes there are rate limits involved. Like a video that I'm currently doing right now is on web scraping. I've been asked to do a big web scraping tutorial. And as part of this web scraping tutorial, I'm scraping Fiverr. The purpose is just to get a bunch of listings, for instance. So I'm just going to run this. What this is doing is this is sending an HTTP call to a specific Fiverr URL. But check out the file size. It's, 1,523,184 characters. And if I go to the data, you'll see this is long as hell. Well, a lot of big websites like this, like Fiverr, they have rate limits in place. And they'll see if you call 5 or 6 times in a minute from like some make.com address, which is probably it's not like a residential IP, it's probably like a data warehouse IP or something. They might actually block you or ban you. And so, I mean, do you really want to have to like do an HTTP request to Fiverr server to risk that every single time you test your scenario? No, you don't. How much cooler would it be if you could just take the HTML that it just output, like word for word? Well, if I keep doing this, it's going to take like 5 hours to get to the end of it, because you can obviously see how big it is. But how cool would it be if I could just copy all of that, move this over, and then just use a set variable module instead? If I could just paste all of that in, voila, now I could just use this as the input, and I'll have saved myself both one operation here, but also the risk of getting rate limited, which would substantially impact my ability to build out the rest of the automation. So sort of a quick hack here, but it's one that I use quite often. And then I mentioned that adding API calls to variables is also important. Well, if I were trying to build out this flow, and I am going to build it out just in a moment here, but if I were trying to build out this flow, instead of me doing an API call to Typeform, or instead of me doing an API call to Pandadoc or something like that, I could just store the results of that call in a set variable module. I mean, like the Anthropic Cloud one is probably the best example because, I don't want to have to call AI and spend some money every time I test. But basically, you could just copy the whole response here, whether or not it's the code or this. This is a lot easier for now. And then you could just feed it manually, let's say, into this parse.json module. That didn't work. One moment. Make .comming with one hand is sort of like drinking and driving. Should not. I do not recommend. Should be illegal. Okay, great. So now we have the JSON in here, right? I just copy and pasted the output from the previous module. Well, now if I just run this, you'll see that it just parsed it all, right? So now I can just start my scenario here instead of going all the way back here, realistically. Yeah, I could just like begin the rest of the flow from here, which is going to be my Pandadoc and the ClickUp fields. So yeah, making gratuitous use of set and get variables is also quite valuable, and it's something that I love doing, and I do pretty often. If you've ever downloaded one of my blueprints and you've wondered, hey, what the hell, why are there all these purple variables in here? We're just consuming all these extra ops. The point is that the op consumption that I spend during the testing, I will save during like not having to run the whole scenario a million billion times because I don't know what's going on. And not only is it substantially less effort, it's also a lot less frustrating, which is quite valuable. But all of this is sort of theory. Why don't we actually look at how you iteratively test in practice? What I'm going to do here is I'm going to go through my 3 top iterative testing practices. And I'm going to go through and show you guys what that looks like in like a real scenario. So this scenario here, the one that I've been sort of playing around with just as an example, essentially what this does is we'll fill out that type form that I mentioned earlier. We'll feed in the results of that type form, so like the company information, what the company does, who the prospect is, whatever, to AI. And then we'll have AI generate the output. And the output is in JSON, JavaScript object notation, just like this. And you'll see that the values here are variables. And I use these variables here to fill in a proposal in a Pandadoc, which is a proposal generator platform. And then this allows me to generate like very nice looking, pretty sexy proposals, if I'm honest, very quickly. And then what I do with these proposals is I will simply add them to a CRM called my sales CRM here. The value there is I just get to generate very nice looking proposals in a very short amount of time, which is obviously nice. And then we also just get to keep them all organized by putting them inside of Pandadoc, which is valuable. And I believe I probably deleted the Pandadoc in question, which is why it's not being found. But I'll show you guys the template in a second, just so that anybody that's watching this without having any sort of background will understand what's going on here. So we'll fill in the title, we'll fill in the first name, we'll fill in the last name, we'll fill in the problem title, we'll fill in this problem text. It's basically just a base proposal template that we enrich using data from, this proposal generator flow from Anthropic Cloud. So if I were to actually try and build this out in practice with one hand, what would I actually do? Well, I'd employ these 3 best practices. The first is that every step along the way, I would run each module individually before I add more. So I'd think to myself, okay, listen, what's the goal of this scenario? The goal of this scenario is to watch responses come in, catch those responses, use that to use the bullet points in the response to prompt AI and have AI generate me a big list of problems and solution statements, big list of variables basically. And then I use those variables to fill in a Pandadoc and then edit a task with custom fields. At every step along the way, what I would do is I would iteratively test every individual module. So for instance, I wouldn't wait until the very end. I'd actually do it from the very beginning. So this proposal generator for workflow loop, for instance, I would actually just right click this, I'd run once, and then I'd go through and then I'd fill out this scenario, or sorry, this type form. So I would do that. And for the purposes of this demonstration, I'm not actually going to go through and do that, but then I would, let's say I'm building this out module by module, which is not actually the best way to do it, as I'll explain in a moment. I have a sleep module. I'd actually run this and I just check to see, does this sleep for 3 seconds? It's almost like a sanity check, right? I put in a delay of 3. Obviously, it's going to sleep for 3 seconds. But if you just iteratively test at every point along your way, essentially, if there's an error, you'll know that the error is between the previous module and the current module. You're not going to put all the logic down, press go, and then wonder what the hell's going on and why it's not working. So if I had a list responses module, well, now I'm going to run a list responses module, right? And in this case, by running it, I got to see that the limit was off. I set the limit at 20, really should have been 1. Now I run it again. Awesome. Input and output looks exactly like what I'm expecting. Same thing with Anthropic Claude. Obviously, I'm just copying and pasting these modules in this instance, but I will run through them one by one at every point just to make sure that everything is as intended. Essentially, I'm getting the data that I thought that I would be getting. So yeah, that's pretty valuable, I would say, just right off the bat. I'm going to leave the rest of these available just for the purposes of, sort of like as an exercise for the viewer. But the point here is this just takes less than a second and it inoculates you against being lost later. It also inoculates you about from being wrong. The second way you iteratively test is you start at the end, you work your way to the beginning. And the way that you do this is pretty interesting. Basically, all you do is you ask yourself, hey, what is the purpose of my scenario? It's a very simple question, and you usually warrant a pretty simple answer. In the case of this flow, the purpose of the scenario is to update a ClickUp record with a proposal. And if you think about it, everything starts, or everything that we ask for at the end, we could then just reverse engineer. So if we want to update a ClickUp record, with a proposal, the natural question becomes, okay, what makes this proposal? And then after you create a proposal, it's like, okay, well, where did we get the data for that proposal? That's probably AI. And then it's like, okay, well, where did we get the data for that AI prompt? Well, it was a form. Okay, well, where did we get the data from that form? Then you go and make the form. So if you wanted to build using this approach, and this is really the one that I usually do, I'll just iteratively test working backwards using this approach, is I sort of start at the end, right? And then I say, okay, so what was the goal of this? Well, the goal of this was to update a ClickUp record. So what am I going to need to do? I'm going to need to, and in this case, I know that the specific module I need is edit a task with custom fields. So I will start at the end, right? And then I will go through and I'm going to do my connection and everything. And I'm going to do this live just for this one module so I can show you what that looks like. So I'll go through and I'll do all the settings. I'll select all the spaces, the workspaces, the folders. I believe I'm probably looking for the sales list here. And then from here on out, this is essentially what I want. Because I started at the end, now I know what variables I need. Like for instance, big question is like, okay, well, like what ClickUp record am I going to update? It's asking me for a task ID. So now I know earlier in the scenario, I'm going to have to supply a task ID. And so by doing it back to front as opposed to front to back, or end to start as opposed to start to end, you then intuitively understand what data you require at the beginning part of the scenario that you might not have currently thought about. The value in doing this too is a lot of modules have requirements. And so do you notice how these are bolded titles, whereas these are non-bolded titles? Well, if something's a bolded title, it's required. If I were to try and click OK here, look at what's going to happen. It's going to say the value must not be empty because it's bolded. And so in this way, I basically ensure no values are ever empty. I'm never wondering where the hell is my data? What data do I need, right? And I'm just always able to essentially build. Now, what I would personally do in this instance, I don't currently have my task ID. What I do is I'd add my task ID here. Then I'd scroll down and then I'd try and hard code the information that I need. I'd hard code the PandaDoc URL in this case. So I'd go and I'd generate maybe a PandaDoc or something. I don't know. In this case, I'm just going to do an example URL, right? app.pandadoc.com. We should probably add an S in there. But this is the whole purpose of my flow is basically to provide a PandaDoc URL, right? And then I think in my case, I also want to update the status or something like that to proposal sent. And now that I have this, now I'm going to do my iterative testing. Now I'm going to right click. I'm going to run this module only. Basically what I'm going to do is I'm just going to like look to see in my CRM, hey, did what I just tried to do work, right? And the answer to that question is yes, what I tried to do worked. I updated the task called Nixariah basically to proposal sent right over here. So that's the value there. The third way to do it is once you're done building, right? So assuming that we've done iterative testing this whole time, basically run an end-to-end test to cap it off. And if you all are unfamiliar with what an end-to-end test is, it's kind of what it sounds like. It's an end-to-end. It's from left to right. You basically run through the entire scenario once. But keep in mind that the vast majority of people, when they build out make.com flows, they'll run through the entire scenario every single time that they try and build something. And so you will only ever have to do this a single time at the very end. Maybe once or twice, who knows if it doesn't work exactly like you were intending it to. But because you only had to do it once and the other person that's building the scenario would have had to do it 50 times, you say 50 times however much time it takes to run through a scenario. And what you'll find is when you're developing more and more complex make.com flows, the time that it takes to run the scenario starts being a rate limiting step. I have had tons of scenarios that legitimately take like 10 to 15 to 20 minutes to test. And if you were trying to test this every single time to get to the point where there was the error and then see if your fix changed the error and made it better, that would be absolute lunacy and it would take you hours. So what do I mean by end-to-end test? Well, I'm going to assume here that I've just built this scenario, this one up at the top. What I do is I would treat everything in this scenario like live data. So I'd actually fill out this automatic proposal form. Now it's kind of tough for me to do this right now, simply because I have one hand, but I'm going to try my best. I'm just going to fill in a bunch of like very quick bullet points. What I know that I need to do, this is just something that I know I need to do in this scenario, is I just need to grab this ID. And then I just need to update this ID here. And so now that I've done this, what I have to do is, I have to go back and fill it all out. So we'll say Nick. We'll say Shariah. We'll say at leftclick.ai. We'll say my company is leftclick. I need to enter in a one-liner. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to paste this in. What's the problem they're suffering from? No automatic way to generate proposals. It's slow and annoying. What's the solution that you pitched? Auto generate proposals. I have so much more respect for people that type with one hand now. Let's do PandaDoc. What are the deliverables? We'll just go PD proposal template. And then how long will this take to deliver? We'll say 1 week for $2,000. Awesome. So I'm actually going to go through this whole thing, and then I'm going to get it ready to submit. And then I'm going to open the scenario here, just make sure that it works. Then I'm going to click submit. And then I'm actually going to test it end-to-end. I'm going to test every single module in here in the desired flow and basically make it as similar as possible to what the client would be doing with my flow, or what my team member would be doing, or whatever the purpose of this flow really is. Just make it as similar to real-world conditions as you possibly could. And that's what's going on right now. It's going through, it's using AI to create my prompt, it's parsing the JSON, it's creating a document, it's editing the tasks with custom fields, just doing everything that I wanted it to do, essentially. And in my specific case, it worked, which is quite nice. But in many cases when you're testing a flow that you haven't built before. I've built this one like 30 times at this point. Maybe there'll be an error right here. Maybe the JSON won't be parsed. I'm like, what the hell's going on? Why didn't the JSON parse? Or in my case, actually, there is an issue. And the issue is that I've listed, again, 20 responses. So, if I hadn't end-to-end tested that, I wouldn't have known that I'm listing 20 responses when I really should just be listing one. I should be listing the one that I just got. So I hope it's clear, but you do need to do an end-to-end test to cap everything off. What I will personally do, running an automation company, is I will usually run through everything from the first module to the last one time on my own. And then the second time I'll run through it, I'll turn on Loom, and then I'll actually record a video of me going through it from start to finish, so that I get to batch my time, and then I also get to create a delivery video while I'm testing the whole flow. I also get to talk myself through the process from start to finish, which is quite valuable, because if you really want to understand something, the best way to do so is to explain it to somebody first. In your case, you're doing it to yourself. All right, that's it. I promised it'd be a short video, and there it is. Iterative testing is awesome. You save tons of time, energy, frustration, some gray hairs, a couple hernias. It's my preferred and really only way that I build in 2024. And if you could just take away one thing from this video, just take away the idea of reverse engineering, essentially starting at the end and then working your way backwards. If you just ask yourself that question, what do I think the purpose of this scenario is? You'll be light years ahead of most other people that try and develop things, sort of from like the front to the back. So hope that helps. Good luck. Thanks so much for watching. If you guys have any questions about the process of iterative testing, just drop them down below as a comment, as well as any video suggestions. Otherwise, like, comment, do all that fun YouTube stuff. I'll catch you on the next video, hopefully without this K-pop mic. Cheers.